Thank you for joining us here for this esteemed panel facilitated by the Global Environmental Facility on a financing roadmap to build the green hydrogen economy. We're joined by some exceptional guests here tonight, but we'll start with the GEF itself with Director Gustavo Fonseca to offer some introductory remarks. Thank you, Gustavo. A warm round of applause for the director. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hold your applause for after. Maybe I don't deserve it. So thank you for being here at this late hour to join with us on this discussion that we consider to be very important and very relevant for the GEF. As you may know, the GEF is one of the financial mechanisms of this convention. It's one of the financial mechanisms of the Paris Agreement, alongside the Green Climate Fund. Two funds that we manage on adaptation, the LDCF and SCCF, and the Adaptation Fund. So with this, we are starting to look across the typical portfolio that we have been providing funding over the past 30 years to look into new frontiers. And this question of green hydrogen and how to create green hydrogen economies has emerged in our strategy as being a very important topic for further development. The GEF gets replenished every 4 years. So we are finalizing the 7th replenishment cycle. So we are almost out of money by now, but hopefully by July of next year, we'll have a fresh new allocation from our donor countries. We are in this middle of the negotiations. And in the ambit of that strategy, we introduced a initiative or an eligibility entry point for looking into how the GEF can be helpful with this agenda on green hydrogen. As we know, achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement require that we get by 2030 with reductions amounting to 45%. This is going to be extremely challenging, as we all know. The analysis that were done on the NDCs that exist show that we are not where we should be, and there is some expectation that we could start looking at the green hydrogen as another wedge in our arsenal to start looking into the transition that needs to be put in place. So creating business opportunities along the value chain, from power generation, from transportation, energy, industrial feedstock, etc. And some of the analysis that we have seen, and that should be very familiar to you, by 2050 there's potential that green hydrogen could represent 25% of the share of energy at that moment. So how do we get to that? We have, as I mentioned, we have included possible investments in this area in our strategy. And the GEF can emulate what we've done very early on, looking at renewable energy and energy efficiency. We started working on this 25, 30 years ago when the GEF was there started. And none of these technologies and opportunities had marketable potential. So no one wanted to invest in these projects. And we started to work by de-risking these investments using both blended finance as well as grant financing. And now we find very little opportunity, to be frank with you, in developing countries, which is where we work to find additionality in grant financing when it comes to renewables and energy efficiency. So we are at that moment, perhaps, that we can start looking at green hydrogen with the same eyes, hoping to create the right conditions, the enabling environment, in order for this to take root. We are very happy to have an extremely exciting panel today, representing important countries and representing experts in this area. And we are also very happy to be with Mr. Francisco Lacamera, who is the Director General of the IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, that will present us with the challenges and opportunities for green hydrogen industry and options to address the existing barriers and how can we create the enabling environment for green hydrogen? So with this, I turn it back to you for further comments.
Excellent. Thank you, Gustavo. And with that, I'll just invite Francesco up onto the stage to do just that. Tell us a little bit more about the potential for green hydrogen in delivering net zero and where we're starting from for financing solutions. Thank you, Gustavo.
So thank you very much for giving me the floor, and naturally it's a great pleasure to be with you today. You know, we are running from one event or another, but this was really an event that we wanted to be part of. And because, as has been said by the rector, discussion on hydrogen, so discussion like this are really timely. And when the COP26 is underway, I think providing input in the discussion is very important. From where come the ambition, there's also coming the way the ambition can be satisfied. So that's the fact that the discussion on green hydrogen is very important. So we know that in this day, economies that amount more than 90% of the global GDP have already put in place policies, national strategies or roadmap to scale up clean hydrogen. Additionally, political efforts are underway to ensure that these efforts are accompanied by a solid financial background. Green financing will play a crucial role in the emerging green hydrogen industry. It will help unlock the global process of technological development and scale up to reduce costs, especially in regions that hold the vast potential for green hydrogen production, but limited public sector funding. Our World Energy Transition Outlook, the ARENA one, make clear that the need to focus on the available solution. We have to have a fighting chance to stay on 1.5 degree pathway. What is important is the scale of the activity, but also is the timing. So if we all agree that the next 10 years will tell very clearly to us if we will be in or out of the pathway to Paris Agreement, we have to use the technologies that we can deploy in this decade. And green hydrogen is a technology can then become competitive already in this decade. And before what it was already taught just a few months ago. The analysis suggests that the need to reduce, we have to reduce, for being in line with the Paris Agreement 1.5 objective, 37 gigaton of carbon emission from the energy cycle, and show how this can be achieved through the use of hydrogen and its derivatives. These account for almost 12% of final energy demand by 2050. So our estimate in our scenario is that hydrogen will be the 12% of total final consumption. And this scenario envisages energy production to triple by the same year. It seems like a small percentage, 12%, but in reality is a large undertaking. Just thinking that today, all the hydrogen is 2.5%, and this produces just by fossil fuel. So this gives the sense of the growth that is necessary and the magnitude of the investment needed. While green hydrogen is receiving increased attention from government and industry, there are several missing pieces in the puzzle. Our hydrogen is actual, just trying to make 3 different tweets, mentioning different technologies, and see how many people will be interested in the different 3 tweets. And you will discover that if the hydrogen is there, the number of people interested will be the high number of people. So to show how the people is looking with attention to hydrogen. With this in view, we have, as ARENA, we have established a collaborative framework that is relevant because it puts together the government, the private sector, the bank, the stakeholders, to discuss how to accelerate the process of going toward hydrogen, and naturally green hydrogen. We are also expanding a partnership with relevant stakeholders, including the World Economic Forum, the Hydrogen Council, and the International Partnership for Fuel Cell and Hydrogen in the Economy. So we wanted to create a constructive space where ideas and solutions could be exchanged freely. And it's important that the intergovernmental organization like us, that an open dialogue with the private sector. And we really hope that in the years to come, the next COPs provide for a larger space for the private sector to be part of our discussion. So when we discuss it with the private, and government, what came is that what emerged is that the current policy framework are often not prepared to facilitate the necessary growth in green hydrogen. ARENA and the World Economic Forum have therefore developed a first series of roadmaps for Europe and Japan, this is the one that we have already published, to help clarify the necessary steps to facilitate development and trade in green hydrogen. And more roadmaps are coming in the next month, including naturally the Latin America, MENA, and the North America. So this roadmap, please go to our website, having a look, are relevant to understand what are the steps that has to be taken for accelerating the process. These roadmaps are based on the identification of the key measures aiming at overcoming barrier in technology, standard and certification, because they are crucial, market design, infrastructure, creating demand, and importantly, financing. So we have heard that we have to wait until July for having the Jeff coming with new funding. I'm also happy to say today that we have launched finally a new facility with the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, and we are I'm raising $1 billion. That is something that we may try also to leverage with our funding, and perhaps we can also discover how we can collaborate for leverage funds. We are also having other initiatives on reducing the risk and others that possibly may be of your interest. So there is a concrete need to invest in high volume of renewable electricity to power the electrolyzers to produce green hydrogen, and to decrease the invested cost of electrolyzer plant with dedicated support, such as through grants and concessional loans. So it's evident that the cost of green hydrogen will come from the cost of renewables and the cost of electrolyzer. The other are coming free from nature. So we have to make this cost going down. It's also vital to have a policy framework that attracts early developers, create fiscal incentive for green products, and implement carbon contracts for difference. At ARENA, this work is high on the agenda. We, with 167 members in all regions of the world, we is at the center of 18 global initiatives that deals with green hydrogen. Let me mention the Green Hydrogen Compact Catalog, which was launched in September during the UN high-level dialogue on energy. The catalog consists on 29 compacts from government, regional and subnational governments, international organizations, and private sector, companies, and coalitions. The commitments include 128 gigawatts of new electrolyzer capacity and more than 26 million tons of green hydrogen produced annually by 2030. Chile was one of the first countries to submit an energy compact that we commend we commended for its hydrogen strategy. 5 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity under development by 2025, produce the cheapest green hydrogen by 2030. Between $1.30, $1.80 US dollar. and become one of the top 3 exporters of green hydrogen and derivative by 2040. So this their strategy, we commend them from it. We also congratulate Namibia is in being the latest green hydrogen compact to be submitted last week with ambition for renewable electricity and electrolyzer capacity at the gigawatt scale, but by 2030. And naturally, I have to mention also my Minister Diego Mesa. We have the chance to have a talk, so I'm being, I have to say, excited to learn the ambition of the Colombian government on this. So, ladies and gentlemen, the coming years will be critical for the energy transition. I just want to give the sense of how the reality is changing rapidly. I can mention was Bloomberg last summer coming saying that green hydrogen was going to be competitive in 2050. It was July last year. At the end of the last year, we say very clear in our report, and they changed their opinion, that green hydrogen was going to be competitive before 2030. Now companies say that green hydrogen will be competitive in 2025, and there are companies in Saudi Arabia that say the green hydrogen derivatives are competitive now. So to give it the sense how the speed of this transformation. And I wish to close to say that Arena doors is always open for all who wish to be part of this positive agenda, and we look forward to working with all of you in making the green economy a global reality. Grazie molte. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Francesco, for those remarks and for reminding us of the important role that IRENA is playing in facilitating the enabling environments for green hydrogen investment worldwide, and exciting news about the fund that you just announced. Before I go on, I failed to introduce myself. My name is Kieran Coleman. I'm a manager with Rocky Mountain Institute, in which capacity I've also helped to lead our work on green hydrogen, including with the launch of the Green Hydrogen Catapult, an initiative of private sector actors in coordination with the UN high-level champions. That is the only private sector coalition focused on green hydrogen, and has done and will announce work just tomorrow to that very point that Francesco just mentioned about the level of ambition and confidence about the pace and scale of cost reduction we can achieve in the next few years, not decades. And a key hypothesis that the Catapult has is that developing countries and emerging economies will play a central role, can play a leading role in driving that cost reduction with the support of financing solutions and enabling roadmaps and strategies in the near term. And so for that, we'd love to hear from some of the key architects of the same, starting with, I'll just read us out while we walk up onto the panel. Honorary Tom Alwindo, the Minister of Mines and Energy from Namibia. Feel free to join us, Minister Alwindo. Minister Juan Carlos Jobé, Minister of Energy and Mining from Chile. And Diego Mesa, the Minister of Energy and Mining from Colombia. Please join us. I also invite at this time Todd Cluett, the Director of Global Affairs from Fortescue Future Industries, a member of that Green Hydrogen Catapult initiative I just mentioned. Great. Well, Ministers, Mr. Cluett, thank you so much for joining us here today for what is a really timely and essential discussion to remark on the progress that each of you is making and the outlook for the near future. Mr. Alwindo, I'd like to start with you. Namibia's vast solar and wind energy resources provide a strong foundation for the development of a green hydrogen hub in southern Africa. How does Namibia plan to create an enabling environment to harness this potential and by attracting foreign investment? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. I'm sure we all have a long day, so let me just make it very, very short. It's true, Namibia has got an ambitious plan to be one of the first green hydrogen hub on the African continent. And we have taken some practical steps to get towards to that. We have created the Green Hydrogen Council consisting of various ministers. We have issued an RFP to actually identify potential investors that can invest with us. And we're doing this because we have great potential for green hydrogen, the power source, whether it's solar or whether it's wind. We have a huge tract of land where we have got this resource, and we have made available about 5,000 square kilometers of land where we have got this wind and solar energy. So we have got that program, to do that. Now, as you can imagine, as it was already said by Arena, for you to build this kind of renewable assets, you're going to have to leverage private sector investment. But for private sector investment also to be there, to be available, given that this is really a new sector we're all going into. So you need to have some public funds that can de-risk the private sector investment. And that's why I think the DFIs need to come into the equation, the intergovernmental funds need to come into the equation to make sure that we do risk this and incentivize private sector investment actually to come and actually be part of this. As governments, obviously, it's not only about the money, you also need to have clear policy framework. People must really understand, as investors need to understand clearly what it is. And one can also imagine to say this is a new industry, and therefore the kind of regulations that will be needed for you to regulate this industry need to be relooked at. So it's probably not going to be the same way you regulate, energy sector. You might have to come up with new regulations, and therefore we are right now busy relooking at our regulation, our legal framework to identify potential problems with that existing regulation framework. So those are very, very important things, the regulations and also the financing or the de-risking of the financing. As Namibia also, we do understand that we need to have also the collaborations with various countries, and therefore it's something that we also need to be in collaborative effort with other countries that we are currently doing this. So, but that is what we're doing to make sure that we got the right regulation in place and also to de-risk the funding of the private sector.
Very clear. Thank you, Minister. To that same point, Minister Meza, Colombia recently just launched its national roadmap, as I understand it, just a month ago, and which can help provide a competitive advantage in scaling, using and adopting green hydrogen, as I understand it intends. Could you elaborate on the main features of that roadmap and any lesson learned during its development for other countries? Thanks.
Sure, thank you. And let me start by thanking for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with fellow ministers and the GEF and Green Carbon Fund. Yes, we did launch the hydrogen roadmap about a month ago after a process of consulting with industry, stakeholders, experts. We get financing from the IDB to get consultants from Universidad de Comillas in Madrid. We have now very specific targets for 2030 after doing a very in-depth review of what are the regions in Colombia that have the highest potential for producing green hydrogen. We divided the country into 8 different areas, and as you probably know, we've been doing an expansion of variable renewable energy in the country. So we identify very well where we have the highest solar potential, the highest wind potential, and the results came out, and it looks very competitive in terms of pricing. So what we have for 2030, we're targeting to have between 2 and 3 gigawatts equivalent of electrolyzing capacity, which would require between 2 to 4.5 gigawatts of variable renewable capacity exclusively dedicated to green hydrogen. That will give us a price of about $1.7 per kilo of green hydrogen by 2030, converging and going down to about $1 per kilogram in between 2040 and 2050. We also identified the off-takers domestically for 2030. The obvious off-taker would be our national company that has two refineries in Colombia, and they're already planning to replace gray hydrogen that they use to lower the sulfur content in their fuels with green hydrogen. Actually, they already announced they bought an electrolyzer which will be installed in the refinery in the northern part of the country in January. So we're going to have a pilot, small scale of green hydrogen being produced as early as February. And they're looking at scaling it up and then replicating in the second refinery that they have. We've also identified that transportation of natural gas is another off-taker. We have one of the largest transportation companies already announcing a pilot as well. They're going to have a blend of about 7% green hydrogen with natural gas, also with intention to scale up. So, with these quantities to 2030, we're also targeting investment of around $3 to $5 billion by 2030. We expect to replace about 40% of the hydrogen used in industrial processes, and also have between 1,500 to 3,000 vehicles between lightweight and heavyweight vehicles in operation by 2030. So it's kind of like a very quick summary of the hydrogen roadmap, which I invite you to consult. Is published in the Ministry of Mines and Energy website, available to anyone. I think lessons learned very quickly: just involve the private sector, the academia as much as possible. That's what we did. We did some workshops to socialize, how the hydrogen roadmap was looking like, but we were able to incorporate the comments. And obviously, a roadmap that looks at 2050 has to be a dynamic and evolving document going forward. So we're obviously continuing to assess with the private sector, where we're going to go and how we can accelerate the incorporation of hydrogen in the Colombian economy.
Thank you, Minister Mesa, for that very clear and quantitative update on your roadmap. Great to see that progress in such short order. And it makes it clear that from both your comments and Minister Alwindo's that the importance of strong regulatory frameworks and plans to set in motion the private sector and bringing down costs, as you're both articulating, which can be competitive with, or the most competitive source of hydrogen by 2030 under those conditions. And as an example of such first mover progress, I'd like to turn to Mr. Jobé, which, as we know, announced its own strategy last year, and it sees green hydrogen becoming a new hub of progress for Chile, similar to today's copper industry. Mr. Jobé, could you provide an update on that strategy, and on the opportunities to become a green hydrogen exporter, and in particular, your view on economic instruments that can help to facilitate and bridge the cost gap between existing opportunities and those based on green hydrogen? Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. At this time, it's late. I think we're all a bit tired. And I want to apologize because we have no women here. We had a couple that were attending, but last minute they sent their excuses. So I think it's worth saying that. Anyway, so that's true. We launched our national strategy last year. It's very ambitious. I think it's going to allow us to take advantage of our very unique natural resources to produce green hydrogen, very cheap green hydrogen. I want to make one point, because if I were you, I would say, okay, these guys are competing among themselves. And I really don't see the hydrogen agenda as a competition. That's the truth. Or not at least a competition between countries. I think this is a competition of all countries together against CO2 emissions. Because the challenges we face are very similar, right? So we all need to set up a regulation. We all need to train human capital. We all need to put in place the financial instruments to accelerate the development of the industry. We all need to get off-takers and so on, right? So I think I see this industry as a great opportunity to cooperate. the challenges we're facing are similar, and we need to work together. So that's the first point I want to make. Because the potential of green hydrogen is enormous, and if it takes off, I think it will, it's going to be so big that there's going to be opportunities for everyone. And I think the countries that will be buying green hydrogen or green ammonia or sync fuels, they will not rely on just one source. If I were them, I would have a diversified set of suppliers. So there's room for everyone. So we need to cooperate and work together. That's the first point I want to make. On financing, I think financing is going to be a big challenge, and we need to work on it at different stages of the value chain. So the first one is off-takes. I mean, if you have a solid off-take, the rest of it flows very easily, right? So, for example, Germany just launched this H2 global instrument, which is this contracts for difference that will allow projects to be developed with a 10-year off-take contract at a defined price. That allow companies to develop projects, which is essential to scale up the size of projects to then push costs down. So that's one very good example. It's public money, but I think at some point they will use that public money plus private money to scale that up, right? So that's one example. There are other examples. For example, we have one project. We have, by the way, 60 projects of green hydrogen being developed in Chile at this point. So we just launched a $50 million round of public subsidies to kind of bridge the gap of costs for private companies. We got like 10 proposals from different companies. It's been very successful. You could say 50 million is not a lot of money, but if we want to award that to 2 or 3 projects, $20 million for a project can make a big difference if it's a subsidy, right? It can kind of move a project from not being profitable into profitability, and then, again, help them scale up production and reduce costs. There's another example in our country, a project that is being developed in Magallanes in the south. It's going to be producing sync fuels, synthetic fuels, hydrogen, CO2 from the atmosphere, methanol, and then sync fuels. And the off-taker is Porsche in Germany, because they want to supply a clean fuel to the owners of the Porsches they have sold historically. You know, by the way, 70% of the Porsches ever sold are still working, right? So they need to supply those clients with a cheap alternative, right? That's niche, but that will help us, again, accelerate the development of the industry. So off-take is one part of it. Public subsidies is another part of it. Concessional funding of finance is going to be another part of it. And I think this is not going to be a one solution. It's going to be a combination of different efforts from the public, the private sector, off-takers, companies themselves. But I'm seeing a lot of traction around it, and I think this is going to move faster than we think. I think we're going to be competitive, and when I say we, the industry, it's going to be competitive, I guess, around 2025. That's my guess. I hope it becomes a reality.
That's exciting. Great to hear that confidence. And from one of you mentioned we, the industry, sitting directly on your left, is now the industry. Fortescue Future Industries, which I think are making progress on green hydrogen today. What's your view, Todd, on pathways to reaching that scale and cost that Mr. Jobé just mentioned? Thanks.
Thanks, Kieran. And I join with the other panelists in thanking people for being here at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night. It shows some commitment. I've been asked this question a few times this week. It's like, what gives you, how do you go about sort of getting to scale by 2030, at scale and at a competitive price? And I think the simplest answer is it's sort of like, how do you eat an elephant? You start, it's one bite at a time. And I'm not in the business of eating elephants, but the key point is you've got to start. And the only way you cut down the costs, and everybody sort of theoretically understands that the cost for the electrolyzers are coming down, the cost for renewables is coming down. There's a whole heap of other parts of the value chain that the prices need to come down, but they only come down if you actually do it. They only come down if you make the order. They only come down if you've got people on the ground actually learning how to do this and making improvements. So, you know, that's our approach. We're just saying we're going to do it. And if you looked at the economics on the prices today, people would say, "Oh, you're a bit too ambitious. You're a bit ahead of the curve." But if you assume it's going to take 3, 5+ years to get the projects on the ground, as the minister from Chile said, we're expecting to be competitive in 2025, maybe even sooner. So we take the position that you shouldn't wait. In fact, if you start in 2025, then you'll be operating in 2030 and 2031. You've missed your opportunity. We think the big part of it is just getting on with it, like doing it. And we've been in each of your countries for 6 or 7 more months. And, you know, I think from a private sector perspective, in terms of what's really wanted from the government, each of the countries, Chile, Namibia and Colombia, really showing good leadership on this front. And I specifically liked the process that Namibia just went through for the RFP process for their green hydrogen, for access to develop the land. But I suppose I'd also wanted to raise just sort of one point, that when you you need to go from the roadmap and the frameworks, and everybody's getting these in place now, and then the rubber hits the road, and we leave, you know, as the private sector, we make an investment, and then we leave the high level roadmap, strategic direction, and then you hit the ground where you're dealing with a whole heap of land approvals, environmental approvals, and a range of approvals across various parts of the government that haven't sped up, you know, that don't operate under the speed that, you know, that we're talking about tonight. And I think one of the challenges for us, for governments, is to really expedite those processes as well. And I'll give you an example. So we've spent a bit of time in Canada, some of the best renewable energy in the world, low-cost hydro, existing capacity to develop, and they will tell you quite openly that it's 7 to 10 years for a development approval timeframe. Now, so one person will tell you that, and then another person, and we come to the conferences like this, and they say, well, if we don't actually have it in place by 2030, we've missed the boat. In fact, the key action's got to be this decade. So we've got to make sure that when we move from the framework agreements and the strategic documents to the nitty-gritty of the 700 different permits you need to get projects up and running, that you maintain the energy and maintain the speed. And on our side, that we maintain flexibility and capacity to respond to what's needed. I think the Minister for Namibia made the point that what we're dealing with is a whole new industry that requires a whole set of new regulations. It's not easy for governments to put in regulatory frameworks in risky environments. So everybody's got to understand that there's sort of risk in this going forward, but equally, if everybody sort of just takes a bite of the elephant, then I feel very confident that we've got the capacity to be at scale and at cost by the end of the decade.
Great, thanks, Todd. And I think we can say that Fortescue is embracing that risk in its own right, and embracing that kind of systems-level collaboration that Minister Jobé mentioned, that we need to take bigger bites together at the same time. And for an example of that, I'd also like to turn back to Minister Windo to hear about the strategy process that's been underway, which I think is unique for having an RFP in the process of developing the strategy itself. And so could you give us an update on Namibia's strategy and the role therein of in particular, that systems-level collaboration shown with Germany in its own announcement and plan to invest $46 million in Namibia's green hydrogen development? Thanks.
I like Forty's approach. You say just do it. No, don't wait 5 years to say it's going to be cheaper in 5 years. Just do it, because by doing it, when you discover what needs to be done, it's true that we need to do it. Of course, with all the good plans in place, but those plans, if they can't be implemented, of course, they will just be plans. With regard to our own processes that we've followed, having issued an RFP and having gone through evaluation to make sure at least we get the right partners actually to develop this with us. In fact, as we speak, our president is actually making some announcement, I think not far away from here, as to how we are going to proceed, the outcome of the RFP. And then from there on, we start already building some of these assets. As you can understand, the size of the asset, the size of the resource that we have got, it's not only going to be something for ourselves, for our own consumption. Obviously, it will be much, much larger than what we're going to need. And speaking of consumption, I don't know, I just got this feeling as we talk about this thing is that we seem to be paying more attention on the supply side of what it is we want to produce. And I'm not so sure whether you're actually putting the same effort or the same emphasis on how do we develop the demand that needs to be that, and more than just building the assets, but they need to have demand as well. So I hope we'll continue also to put, the same emphasis on both sides of the equations. But our idea of this green hydrogen, of course, is to collaborate with partners. Today, we just signed an MOU with Belgium, for example, who also want to collaborate with us. And probably will then be off-taker of some of these assets or the output that we are going to be producing. Equally, also within the regional arena, we are close to South Africa being the largest economy, where I think they are mostly also powered by fossil fuel. So in collaboration with them, certainly we're going to make this much more viable for people to actually invest. Because as you say, if you got an off-taker, if you got a guaranteed off-take, obviously everything else falls in place. So that is how we're going, putting emphasis on international collaboration to make sure that at least we have got a potential off-taker for what we are going to be producing.
Thank you, Minister. Very, very clear. To that same point, I'm curious, Mr. Mesa, if you could speak to the demand side in Colombia and your own government's plan to help kickstart that cost reduction that you spoke of and the introduction of green hydrogen in the refining sector, in the heavy-duty transport, and other. Thank you.
Sure. Before I do that, just one very short story to complement Minister Javed's comment about that this is not a competition between countries and how we can collaborate because the opportunity is so huge. And this is the stories that usually don't come out. And the way we accelerated the issue of the roadmap for Colombia, it was about 8 months ago. I got a call like at 1 in the morning from my president, President Duque, and he was in the plane departing from Chile. And he said, I just had a very long conversation with President Piñera about hydrogen, and I want to have a roadmap out as soon as possible. I said, yes, President, we're working on that. It's gonna take some months. I said, no, I want it as quickly as possible. So we committed to have it by September. But it was a discussion between the two presidents, and they were looking at the opportunities for the continent as a whole to use our natural resources and to use the words from Minister Javed from yesterday, turn this climate crisis into an opportunity for the region. So just to corroborate what he was saying about working together countries in Latin America. So to your question about demand, I think in Colombia, I mentioned the refineries. Key is to make sure that we help the companies bridge, the cost of producing green hydrogen at the moment, and we've done that in Colombia with an energy transition law that has specific tax incentives for production of green hydrogen. And also the good thing is that, the main consumer of hydrogen in Colombia at the moment, which is our national oil company, Ecopetrol, is completely aligned with the energy transition policy that the government has. So that's number one. Second, thinking about other uses such as transportation with clean mobility, we're working also with companies to make sure that they can all manufacture the cars and the vehicles in Colombia. We work with the Trade and Commerce Ministry as well to provide incentives to have these manufacturing plants located in our territory. And then last but not least, working as well with the Agriculture Ministry, because another potential use would be in petrochemicals. So we're looking at green ammonia, green methanol. There is significant demand in Colombia that is not being able to be supplied with domestic production. So we see another opportunity also to reduce imports of ammonia and methanol with domestically green-produced hydrogen. So those are the key elements. And finally, talking to Minister Jabed, and he mentioned $50 million US dollar grant to close that gap in financing. So when I talked to him, we had a conversation in Santiago at the time. So I went back home and said, well, we don't have those resources in Colombia. We have, some challenges from a fiscal point of view, but we were able to find is what we're using in Colombia is we're using money from our royalty system that is, the royalties that were paid by the oil and gas and the mining sector. And we decided to allocate 10% of the royalties for science, technology, and innovation projects. And within that pot, we're going to be allocating for hydrogen projects, and we can get close to something in the range of between 50 and 100 million US dollars.
Fantastic. And just to clarify, is that to say that's with Chile in direct collaboration? That
we got the idea from Chile, right? So
okay. Then maybe I'll send it back to Minister Jobé to hear more, and in particular about the role of international collaboration. I know there's been some talk of a Latin America Green Hydrogen Alliance, and what can such regional alliances do to address these sorts of cost barriers, knowledge gaps, et cetera? Or we could even say diversity, perhaps, in the green hydrogen workforce going forward.
Yes. So I think if we want to attract private investment to go down to Latin America and invest, we need to make life easier for them, right? So there are a couple of things that we can do as different countries in cooperation. So first, regulation, right? If private companies need to navigate a patchwork of different types of regulation in every country they want to invest, that's a nightmare, especially if we want to move quickly. So that's one area. The second one is certification. I mean, this is a discussion we don't have time now, but what do we mean by green hydrogen or clean hydrogen? What are the standards? Who's going to be checking that those standards are complied, and so on, right? If we have a common understanding of that in the region, and if that's well aligned with, the most, predominant standards internationally, that makes a lot of sense. At some point later in the future, infrastructure, right? We have, for example, 7 gas pipelines connecting Chile with Argentina. We use them to move natural gas, but eventually we could use them for green hydrogen or for clean hydrogen. The more integrated our energy systems are, the more reliable they are, the stronger they are. We have different natural resources. We have sun and wind, but we have some hydro. But Brazil and Paraguay have a lot of hydro, and Colombia has a lot of hydro, and so on, right? So if we build an integrated energy sector, that's more attractive, I think, also to get a stable, renewable energy supply, which is key to reduce costs of production, and so on. So I think there are many areas of cooperation, and I think this is an industry that is being built as we speak. We don't know exactly how it's going to look like in 10 or 20 years, the type of contracts we're going to have. So to be in close coordination, speaking to one another, learning from others' mistake, might sound simple, but I think it's very important because in this case, we don't have a lot of time, and we need to learn together.
Thank you, Minister. So certification, regulation, and I heard infrastructure, development, and utilization, and each of those clearly has a need for private sector input as part of that process of development. So Todd, maybe in closing for our panel, before we open it up to questions and answers from the audience, I'll turn to you. What more would you say is needed from the private sector's perspective in the way of collaboration to get this market off the ground? Thanks.
well, part of me feels like we can finish early because Minister Joubert just answered the question the way I'd answer the question. I mean, you know, accreditation is really important. Shared infrastructure becomes really important. And shared understanding of the challenges and a joint commitment to move quickly is really important. I did want to say also that, I suppose to reinforce some of the points that were made earlier, when we started visiting Namibia in, I think it was March of this year, the minister's colleagues asked, who's doing this well? And I said, we think Chile's doing it well. Go to Chile because we think they've got a really good, you know, good starting point. And then I'd spoken to some folks in Colombia who asked the same question about who does roadmaps well, and put them in touch with the Australian government chief scientist who'd done the roadmap. So it's not just the governments who are talking, it's the private sector and the governments, because essentially we're all in this together and there's a whole heap of unknowns, and we are, you know, the better that we're equipped to understand the emerging framework and share the information, the faster it all moves. So I've been really heartened I think I've visited probably 30, 40 countries over the past 12 months. And I've been really heartened by the sort of the sharing of information and understanding. So I think I wouldn't add too much more to what's already been said, to be honest, Kieran. I think the only thing I would add is that in some countries there needs to be, what I'd like to add to the conversation is a capacity for two things. One is greater political risk insurance in some less stable countries. Some of the less stable countries, the poorer countries in the world, who've got really good natural resources that we could use for green hydrogen, but are essentially exempted from finance because of the instability of their political system. We think there's a role for whether it be IFIs or rich countries to play a role here and make it easier for private companies to take the risk and invest in some of these countries, because we think the investment in itself has a long-term development impact for the country, and the outcome's good because they've got the resources. And I think the other point I'd raise, Kieran, and it's a sort of a sub-point, is I think there's a role for international institutions in particular to help invest in governance throughout the process. And I know in Namibia the EU has been helpful, the German government's been helpful, and providing sort of a set of skills that aren't readily available. And the quality of decision making in these places is really, really important to the investment decisions we make. So I think that's a really valuable role for the IFIs, for wealthier countries, and sort of the coalitions of countries. If they want to do something, don't just say, oh, we're committing to a X, gazillion dollar fund. Make it practical, make it tangible, and reduce the operating risk of making an investment in some of these countries.
Thanks, Todd. Information flows, decision making, all key inputs to the process that follows. So thanks for that, those insights. I'd like to turn it over to open it up to the crowd for any quick questions you might have while we have this distinguished panel up here. Recognizing it's late in the day, but any thoughts, any prompts from the discussion we just had, please.
Thank you very much. I think it's very thought-provoking and very comprehensive as well. And it's really good to hear that we're not, compete with each other, but it's more like, collaborate among countries and also between public sectors and private sectors. So my understanding about the hydrogen, it will have the potential in those hard-to-abate sectors. So for electrical, we have the cars, there is really high take-up. But for aviation and for, the shipping, so how long do you see that implementation, and how could we encourage the take-up in that aviation sectors and these shipping sectors? And what would be the risks or what would be the challenges for them to take up? Is there any inertia? If so, and how could we help those sectors? Thank you very much.
I can kick that off. So, I've met with several shipping and aviation companies. So, I think the technology is ready for some sectors of the, ground transportation. Forklifts are there, buses are kind of there. Shipping and aviation it's going to take a little longer. In shipping, there's one example of that I think it's promising. Maersk, for example. They identified this chicken or egg problem. They said, we're not building ships because we won't have clean fuel. And they realized nobody was producing clean fuel because there's no ships to run with it. So they just put an order. They're going to have, I think it's by 2025, I think it's 8 to 12 ships running on green methanol. And say, guys, now you start working on the fuel, right? So, and I think it's going to be methanol and not green ammonia. Some people think it's going to be ammonia for shipping. I think this is still an open discussion, whether it's going to be ammonia, methanol, or others. They think that green ammonias have some safety issues. For the crew and leakage for the sea and so on. But I think probably by 2025 or so, we will start seeing the first ships running on clean fuels. Aviation, it might take longer. But I met with Airbus, for example, and other companies, and they think that planes, especially in long trips, are going to be, flying with sync fuels. Maybe clean hydrogen itself for shorter flights, but longer flights, the volume, it's such a challenging problem that's not going to be solved for, if you want to fly from London to New York, in 10 years or 15 years, you're going to be flying with sync fuels. That's my guess, no? I don't know what you think. But it's not going to be hydrogen itself. And there's another interesting sector or segment, which is trains. We met with Deutsche Bahn a couple of months ago, and they already have several pilots running on hydrogen and its derivatives, especially for rural areas. So I think hydrogen, in a nutshell, is going to be playing a role in different type of transportation, in niches, right, or in specific sectors or segments.
Just adding to that. So Fortescue, company I work for is sort of, the parent company is a big mining company. It's an iron ore company in the middle of nowhere in northwestern Australia. And we just took the view that we're not waiting, we'll just do it ourselves. So for the big mining trucks, which are literally 7 meters high, we've already got them running on green hydrogen. We're trying, and we run locomotives, we run trains. So we're trialing green fuel cells in the locomotives and in our ships, because we own ships that transport the iron ore largely to China. We're trialing green ammonia. And as I was saying before, part of it's just doing it. And the more you do it and the more others do it, the more we'll learn and, just start eating the elephant type thing. So I think that's sort of part of the story. It's too late and I'm forgetting the second part of the story. The second part of the story. I'll just leave it at that. There was a second part of the story, but I can't remember it.
Just a quick one. I think it won't just happen by itself. But if you start to have like 40s becoming the champions, one or two people who credible and become the champions of that year. This make economic sense, and therefore it is. Suddenly everybody starts to think, oh yeah, it's doable, and then therefore the demand side I was talking about, people start actually doing it. But you need somebody to prove it, to make it happen. Then people say, okay, yeah, if they can do it, if a big mining company can do that and it's working, it's making money for them, they start thinking, well, this is doable. So I think the more champions you have, the quicker then the industry will take off as we go forward.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe another analog to that, to the consortium version of Todd's internal Fortescue Mining Group version is H2 Green Steel in Sweden, right, which brought together the customers to both invest in and offtake the steel that the company itself would produce, and in the process bring down, cross those R&D boundaries. So there's a lot of sort of active leadership and problem solving in the sector, both within and between companies rather. Any other questions, please?
Thank you so much. It's very interesting. Learned so much. I just wanted to ask, are there negative externalities to hydrogen? And if so, is there a possibility of addressing them now whilst we're in the process of mainstreaming it? Thanks.
Great question. Any takers on the hardball?
I think I'll go quickly. I mean, I think one challenge, and obviously we've discussed this with Fortescue as well, is the amount of land that you would need to have for the production of variable renewable energy to be able to get to scale that the world needs. So I think we would need to think about having other uses for the land that's going to be used. So it's not only exclusively dedicated to producing renewable energy, but combining it with some type of agriculture that could coexist with the energy use. So I think that's something, because the land extension is going to be significant, and we need to find a way that we make that sustainable as well with the other needs that we have.
And another one I've seen, I see that one, right? In the north in Chile, we have solar PV. And with solar PV, it's very hard to use the land for something else, right? In the south, with onshore wind works well. So people can have, their sheep there, and the wind farms work well. The other issue we have seen is water. So technically, it doesn't require a lot of water. Just to give you a sense, we have estimated that our mining industry, which is big, we produce 28% of the copper in the world. We could replace 100% of the diesel that the 1,500 trucks we have in mining. They could replace all the diesel they burn, 2 million cubic meters per year, with green hydrogen, and producing that green hydrogen with less than 1% of the water the mining industry already uses. So it's not really a problem of quantity. It requires very little water, but it's more a political issue, right? So people say climate change, we have very severe droughts. Mining operations are usually in areas that have severe droughts. So even if it's very little water, people get very sensitive around it. So even it's a drop of water, so if you don't explain it well early on, talk with local communities, water can become politicized and can be a problem developing projects. That's my sense. And if many people are thinking about using diesel water, so desalinated water, but still there, it has some environmental impact on the sea. So water could be an issue if it's not handled correctly. That's my sense.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? One in the back, and then I think we'll bring it to a close.
Thanks. My name is Paul Holtus. I run the World Ocean Council, which is the global blue economy business organization. So we have shipping, fishing, offshore renewables, et cetera, together. Just in terms of hydrogen and the maritime industries, we're starting to see a level of convergence, and you mentioned the shipping recently, and so we looking at really creating a coalition of companies from the maritime sector. And one of the real drivers on that has been the fact that it looks like if 5% of the shipping industry took up hydrogen, it would create the financial case overall for the sector to move forward. And the other big piece of this coming on board is the Saudi hydrogen production, which may actually provide the supply then that we can really connect that. So my question is, though, you've mentioned a few minutes ago about the different sectors. Are we looking at a single hydrogen kind of economy across the sectors in terms of technology and supply demand at that level, or is it really going to be individual sectors that are going to be sorting themselves out and needing to sort out their own technology and supply systems that will make it a lot more difficult to really achieve the economies of scale that are going to drive this forward?
great question. Thank you.
I think that's a hard one. I think that the right answer is we don't really know. I don't know what you guys think, because it's
You answered the question.
yeah, because we don't really know. I think it's evolving. The technology is evolving. People are making different bets. So for shipping, if it ends up being ammonia, that is a market that is already very well developed. Logistics around ammonia are there. It's going to be easy. If it ends up being sync fuels, it might be that oil companies take over that segment because they have the clients, the ships. I mean, I think it's hard to tell at this point. It's very open, but I think that reinforces one point that was made earlier. So first movers here will have an advantage. It's so open, there's so much uncertainty that the ones who make bets and get that right will kind of shape the industry for the future. So I think we have several, to say differently. At this point, we have different potential shapes of the industry in the future. And which one's going to materialize, it's going to depend on the bets different people make and how successful they are. I'm not answering your question, but that's how I see it. I'm sorry.
Can I add? I'm sort of also going back to the question on the side, which has come to me, but I think it's related to your question. A lot of the industries we deal with, and steel is in the back of my mind because we're an iron ore company, they've got really, really big capital costs to replace their machinery or their production equipment. And for most of them, they don't want to make an investment now in non-green fuel, non-green hydrogen, and then be stuck with an asset for 30 or 40 years. That's essentially, an isolated asset, because you don't want to be in 2050 putting, diesel into a machine. So there's this huge opportunity, and this goes to your first mover advantage. The first groups who come and solve the question of, how do you power a locomotive with hydrogen, they're the big winners, because I think everybody will just fly in after that. And I think those sort of innovations, or the application of innovation, will start shaping your industry. And I think it'll happen really, really quickly. So there'll be some people who are brave enough to go out and make the investment now. But if you're developing technology that's applicable in airlines, steel-making facilities, locomotives, and you get it right, everybody's going to come on board, and I think that'll shape your industry.
Thank you both. Any other reflections on that in response to that question? Okay. I think we're going to close up. Well, thanks to each of you. Just reflecting on how 4 years ago green hydrogen was barely a topic, and over the past 2 years has really come to the top of the agenda as the next threshold, the next question for innovation following on renewables cost reduction. And so it's great to have these leaders share learnings and thoughts from the front lines. Really appreciate that, and look forward to seeing the progress unfold in the months and years to come. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.